conscious parenting for your partner as a parent with your co-parent? Because I'm really curious about how that works, because in my case, I think that I have a lot of patience, or my reactivity is really at bay with my baby so far, but it's mainly the partner, because it's a really crazy experience when two people are trying to parent a child. And I always tend to take up the strong side. Like, I don't feel tired, I don't feel sleepy, I don't feel anything, I can do everything. And if the other person, maybe I'm not validating their emotions, so I'm just curious if conscious parenting is also just an approach towards the children, or is it also an approach towards the co-parent?
Well, I think it just automatically starts to spill over with every relationship you have. Like, if you are committed to treating your children this way, then you're going to sort of almost automatically extend some of that grace to your partner. It's definitely been something that's occurred with me. Now, it's not perfect, because when you're dealing with your partner, you're dealing with an adult. You're not dealing with someone whose brain isn't still developing. So maybe he doesn't get quite as much grace from me, but I will say, I think it does extend to that relationship. Is that what you're asking? Am I understanding? Yes. But there's also the challenge of the co-parent being raised very differently. Because here's the thing, there are people who were raised in traditional authoritarian households, which the chair gets swung at them, whatever. But they don't see it as having been harmful. They see it as having benefited them. They see it as, this is why. There was actually a video I saw on Instagram, I think it might have been yesterday, where this creator, he's successful. He's been a creator for whatever number of years, and he's become successful. He's on TV, he's getting flown out, he does shows and everything. He's like, I'm really struggling here because my kids don't have it as hard as I do. And I didn't want them to have it as hard as I do. I want them to have some ease. But then I'm also like, having it as hard as I did is what made me the way I am. And I'm like, you're the way you are in spite of what you went through. The adversities aren't the things that sort of, I don't find them to have been beneficial to me in any way, but there are people who still sort of carry that mindset that adversity is what is necessary for children to become good, decent people. So if you have a partner who operates under that premise, who believes that adversity is beneficial to children, it can be really, really hard to kind of get them to sort of change their mindset. And really, conscious parenting, like a mindset shift, has to happen for any of this to take hold. Because, you have to be conscious of the ways in which the way you were treated was harmful to you. If you're unwilling to unpack that, you cannot be a conscious parent. And I've been able to do it while still maintaining that. I'm at my mom's house right now. She's watching my kids downstairs. I still maintain a positive relationship with my parents. I still maintain love and respect for them, but I'm also able to hold them accountable for having done things that have made my life incredibly hard having BPD.
I think when you start to parent is when you also start looking at your own parenting, like how you were parented, and you look at how you were parented and you see, is that the way I want to parent? It makes you look harder at your experiences as a child. And I think some people decide they're going to do the opposite of how they were raised. Some people feel like, no, this is good for me, and they stay with it. But becoming a parent is usually a stressful time. And I think part of that stress is really kind of coming to terms with your own parents.
Yeah, for sure. Believe it or not, I would have been one of the ones who was like, I was spanked and I'm fine. Okay. Big old BPD Lisa, who cannot maintain a single friendship, was running around talking about I'm fine. It blows my mind. Some people are able to examine it and say, oh, that wasn't great. I want to not do that. So it really all depends on sort of how your brain, for instance, my response to my upbringing is very different from my brother's response to our upbringing, or even my sister's response to our upbringing. My brother and I are the only ones of my siblings who have kids. And I mean, although I've never had like the deep conversation with him, I would venture to guess that he is one of those, like, it was good for me, and I'm going to pass on some of this good for me, tough love to my kids. And I'm, of course, looking on in horror, but okay. So authoritarian parenting is like a traditional parenting, where it's because I'm the boss, you're the child, because I said so. You can be an authoritarian parent who doesn't spank, but are still sort of like, you place yourself on a hierarchy when it comes to your children. And so they must, obey in strict obedience, that sort of thing. And there are degrees of authoritarian parenting. I'm sure it falls on a spectrum. But that's what it is, versus sort of conscious or gentle parenting, respectful parenting. That all falls under the authoritative umbrella.
I sometimes think the authoritarian is the default form of parenting, because parenting is really scary. You are responsible for another being. And I always felt the weight of that responsibility, and it stressed me out. It gave me a lot of anxiety. So I found myself being authoritarian because I just was like, this huge weight was on me. And I felt like, well, I'm going to take charge. And if I'm strict and can tell you what to do and when to do it, and if you just do it, we'll all be okay.
Yeah.
And I sometimes think that that's like a default way.
And as far as authority, I think another reason we maybe just kind of go into that style of parenting, this is the only thing I can think of because it does come out a lot in my mind, is life can be difficult. And life, just like my ancestors used to see it, was the world is slippery, right? So we always have to kind of maintain balance. And because the world is slippery, there's a lot of great things in the world and there's a lot of bad things in the world. So even though I was raised by my single mom, I was halfly raised by my grandmother. So obviously very different styles. And the one way I can understand my grandma raising me a little bit harder was because you do get scared on how we are going to deal with the world. So for instance, these generations coming up have just wonderful emotional intelligence. But the tough part is sometimes when you're dealing with really emotionally intelligent kids, which they are, sometimes other things are harder to handle. And I think to myself, I need to make my child emotionally intelligent and kind and gentle, but I also need to make her a warrior because the world could be a war. So it's always very conflicting in that sense. And maybe it's because I come from two very different parenting styles who parented me at the same time.
Well, certainly with Black and Indigenous cultures, it's colonialism is really at the root of the behavior and the way in which we treat our kids. And so, for instance, for people who are descendants of slaves, there is a legitimate fear that comes from the belief that you don't want massa or the white man to get your child. What they have is far worse than what you would ever do. And so you operate from a place of fear that if you do not introduce your child to adversity, they will be incapable of handling it in life. And I mean, I'm a sample size of one, but I guarantee you there are plenty of folks who will say, if anything, I feel completely crippled. Well, not completely, I'm a little dramatic, but I do feel that it has fundamentally robbed me from the life that I could have had and should have had, because I have to deal with mood swings that can take me out of like being able to be a functioning person every single month.
And you're absolutely correct. And I think it does lead to that, we discussed it, generational trauma.
Yeah.
And it really is an issue that you have to unpack, just like you said. But if you're not ready to unpack it, if you're not ready to say, hey, maybe this wasn't correct, or hey, maybe we're not living in those times anymore. But it is a difficult path out there. So I think it is important that if you are hearing it, you should start at least unpacking it little by little and realizing that a lot of trauma that you have and that we tend to not break the cycle and bring it into our children is intergenerational trauma. And until we kind of unpack that, then we can deal with everything else. So you bring up really great points, Lisa.
Yeah, and little by little, like you don't have to break or like I'm one person. These generational curses have been coming through generations. They're not all going to end with me. Like I'm going to do my very best. But the reality is you can only do what you can only do. And I could only do what my nervous system can tolerate. And some people's nervous systems cannot go there. Like I have experiences myself where like, for instance, I could even say when I was spanked as a kid, I have zero, like my mind, I can take you to the point where I am going to be spanked and then it's a blank. Then we're on to the second day. I don't remember the action. Like my mind can't take it. The fear was that great.